to tell you, I find it hard to take. When people run in circles, it's a very, very mad world. Mad world.
Just as viruses or malware infect a computer and program it to self-destruct, Wetiko programs the human biocomputer to think and behave in self-destructive ways, covertly operating through the unconscious blind spots in the human psyche. Wetiko renders people oblivious to their own madness, compelling them to act against their own best interests. People under its thrall can, like someone in the throes of an addiction or in a state of trauma, unwittingly create the very problem they're trying to resolve, clinging desperately to the thing that is torturing and destroying them. That's a brief excerpt from Dispelling Wetiko, Breaking the Curse of Evil. It's a 2014 article from Quest magazine from Paul Levy, who's one of the authors who's done the most. There's a small handful of authors who have brought us different interpretations of this Wetiko Windigo, and sometimes called the white man's virus. And today we're going to be speaking with Richard Lowenthal. And Richard, it's great to have you back and for us to be having this conversation. I know both of us have a lot of interest in, and somehow I would call it a calling. I'll look forward to hearing how you couch it in your experience, because you do so much writing about, so what are the human motivators that take us to this polycrisis
Mm.
place that we all find ourselves in, this self-destructive, self-terminating elements that seem to be so much larger than this massive human endeavor on the planet. Uh, it's it seems like an all-consuming presence that we're dealing with here. So, welcome. I'm really glad we're having this conversation. I predict it will be a multi-part conversation. We've just been speaking a little bit before we turned on the recorder. And even in just the first few moments of talking about this material, it just is so huge. And just that one paragraph, the one piece that
Yeah.
I've never been able to answer for myself, just this tiny element from that one paragraph is why on earth are we compelled to act against our own best interests as human beings on this planet? How is it that we are engaged so fully, so globally in what is clearly a self-terminating culture?
Mm.
So that's kind of
Yeah.
my reason for wanting to be with you in this conversation. That's what my starting point. I'm looking forward to hearing how it lives for you. What are the questions that kind of niggle at you about this bizarre way that we are acting individually and collectively? So great to have you here, and I'm wondering if you were sparked by any part of that paragraph, or if you'd like to jump in any way to let us know, how is this Wetiko, this Windigo, this uh, extraordinary energy that seems to defy all logic, of life wanting to continue itself. I'm wondering how you would introduce your relationship with this Windigo thing, this Wetiko.
Well, thanks. Thanks for having me
Yeah.
on here. I'm glad to be here too. And I'll just say, when Paul Levy writes about this, um, he also called it me disease,
Mhm.
and I think that's a good, another good way to look at it too is it's like the ego gone mad. It's like the modern world. It's sort of like the outpicturing of the ego gone mad. And so maybe dealing with Watiko is no different than a spiritual or deep psychological growth process where you're confronting all the machinations of your own ego and other people's egos and healing, finding those things in yourself that are really stuck in dark places that need to be healed. It seems to me it's all part of a spiritual growth process, and dealing with Watiko is a big part of it these days.
Indeed. So, there are a few different voices that I would just like to start out by including, and this is by no way, no means a comprehensive list. It's just some of the really heavy duty thinkers of our time and
Yeah.
people who have done their homework about this extraordinary aspect of the human condition. And some of them might not talk directly about Watiko at all. I
Right.
actually have not read the full volumes of Iain McGilchrist's work, but Iain McGilchrist is a research psychiatrist and who's done extraordinary research into the human condition, and his
Mhm.
way of speaking about what you and I are now, throwing around the words Wetiko, Windigo, and so on. His assertion is that what has us be in this polycrisis, in this existentially threatening global crisis that we're in, is an imbalance of our hemispheres.
Mhm.
That the one that should be holding the big picture, should be in charge, so to speak,
Right.
has been subservient to the other one, which really should be in service of that more
Yeah.
textual, more relational um, aspect or hemisphere in our own brains, both individually and collectively. And for me, there's a gold mine in his extraordinary work, his depth and breadth of his work, uh, that is at least kind of next door to this conversation we're going to be in today about Wetiko and Windigo. And it's more personal. It's more like it is
Mhm.
both more deeply personal, like the hemispheres of my brain being in balance or in appropriate relation with one another, or not. And then how that can so immediately and remarkably well, it fits at the global interpretation of that imbalance. So that's
Mhm.
one, I just want to bring that source of potential expansion of the conversation at some point.
Mhm.
But the main voices that I think you and I are going to be talking about today are uh, from primarily Paul Levy's work about Wetiko, and I'll be sure to include the names of the various books and authors in the show notes. Um, and it's perhaps, because you sent that remarkable reminder of the remarkable author, excuse me, article from 2014
Oh
that I
yeah.
just read from. Um, I'd like to start with Paul Levy's layout, and I'll just say it again because I know we had quite an extensive conversation before we turned on the official recording for today. And I just keep returning, and this is since I was a kid. I've had the question of why is it we are so uh, committed, apparently, to acting against our own best interests. At the core of that, acting against that which would have our lives flourish rather than be a rapid decline into, I don't know if it'll end up being extinction, but it'll sure be a whole lot of death and suffering. Um, it seems like to me we're headed that way. And so there is an insidiousness. There's a way that um, I'll just mention since I'm listing a few of the other kinds of supporting articles or references for this conversation. You reminded me of a book I read years and years ago called The Mind Parasites. And similarly, it's this idea that we have in this novel, the author introduces us to the idea that there are actually parasitic presences that we can become aware of that are within us, and they know what we're thinking, and they do not have good intentions for us. And
No.
so the more aware we are of them, the more that they can tend to be quite destructive for us and literally drive us crazy. So I want to just again mention, like I did with Iain McGilchrist, this kind of supporting or parallel storyline that nudges toward that. I don't know if I'll ever get an answer to my question that so plagues me of how on earth and why on earth are we so uh, inclined to vote and act against our own best interest? What has us do this? So I'm going to be quiet now. I just wanted to mention these few supporting or parallel resources, references, and my little nudging question that I've carried for 50 years now of why is it that we're doing this? What is going on that has us do this? So I hand it over to you to share with us what what have been the seedlings that you're aware of in your own thinking, in your own writing, in your own exploration that have had nudged you into this conversation, this exploration for so long.
Well, like you, I've always felt a kinship with the natural world and just an awareness of how we were basically wrecking it and plowing it under and destroying it in one way or another, all over the world. And it just occurred to me, I think, you know, there are many answers to the question of why human beings are this way and why are we on this self-terminating path. But I think one way to look at it is through the through the lens of out of control growth, like
Mhm.
especially Western civilization has been engaged in this out of control growth for centuries now, and we've called it progress. And in some ways there was some progress, but also an incredible amount of destruction. So, but well, the image I'm getting in my mind is of a rapidly spiking curve, a graph, where population is spiking and rising rapidly. Consumption is spiking and rising rapidly. Trade is spiking and rising rapidly. And all these things are happening. And so you got increasing consumption, increasing population, vastly increasing population. And then you got the addictive element too, that people get addicted to all these consumer pleasures and comforts, and we think we need them when, 100 years ago, people didn't have half the things or even three-quarters of the things we have now. and they managed to survive just fine. I mean, life might have been a little harder, but we get addicted to all these consumer comforts, and then we're on this path of destruction, because of the growing population, because of the spreading consumerism and the idea, people, millions, not, no, not millions, billions of people around the world now all think that they deserve to have what we have. And they do deserve it just as much as we do, which is not really, we don't, but
Yeah.
because we have it, they think they deserve it. So now everybody around the world wants this consumer lifestyle, which is like, as far as I'm concerned, pretty much our death knell unless we can turn this around because we cannot keep going like this. The population is rising, consumption's rising, the oil
Yeah.
addiction is still rising. It's like, it's insane. But
Yeah.
we're caught up in this rising graph curve. I don't know what to call it.
Yeah. So if I could, I'd like to just plug in one of the simple kind of elemental truths that has nudged me in the way that I've been talking about since I was a kid to answer this question. Like one of the lies that we have built this entire global culture on is the notion that we will always have infinite growth
Right.
on this finite planet.
Yep. I know it's
Like
crazy.
to me, it's a pretty simple conversation, and it should be a short conversation. Like we'd be done right now
Yeah, I
because
know.
we would both say, "Oh, well, that of course is impossible
Right.
on its face. That's impossible. Infinite growth, finite planet, can't do it."
Right. I mean, it's perfectly
But
obvious to me.
yeah, yeah, me too, me too.
I
So
mean,
what
wow.
you and I are talking about is something that, there's a reason why indigenous cultures here in Turtle Island in the USA um, called it the white man's disease
Yeah, I
or the
know.
white man's virus, is that
Yep.
there is there is something like that book that I was just describing, the mind virus that you reminded me of just, a little while ago. Something so insidious inside our minds,
Yeah.
both individually and collectively, has us be able to, with a straight face, teach our children that you dream it, you can become it. We deserve all these things. Let's take one
Yeah.
of our 5 cars and drive to the store and get a whole bunch more or have it delivered by Amazon to our doorstep
I
and
know.
and it will go on forever. So we need to concern ourselves with is teaching our children to dream bigger still.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
Whoa.
it is I literally have hit right here. I'm present to the impossibility. This is why I called my book The Impossible Conversation.
Yep.
I don't know how to get out of this kind of the little knot, excuse me, the little device that has your fingers get stuck.
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah,
You
yeah,
can't, no
yeah.
matter how hard you pull, you can't get them out.
Yeah, the Chinese thing. Yeah, yeah, right. Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
And I have no idea
Mhm.
verbally how to get out of this part of the trap because it is so completely on its face insane. Just starting with that one sentence.
Yeah.
There is no way to have infinite growth on a finite planet. And that seems like enough to me. Sounds like it seems like enough for you.
Well,
We go from here.
this reminds me also of that quote from Einstein, and I'm not going to come up with the right quote, but he said something like, with the dawn of the atom and atomic energy and atomic weaponry, everything has changed except for our mode of thinking, or except for our modes of thinking. And I think that's like really an incredibly important idea. And I totally agree. But I think what's going on is, a long time ago, even 100 years ago, let's say, every person's sphere of influence was much smaller. I mean, today, everything is influencing everything else. Global trade is impacting the entire world.
Mhm.
So I think our minds, and I've read this, some other people have come up with this idea too, um, that our minds are really only geared to dealing with our immediate circumstances. We really have a hard time with long range planning. We have a hard time with big picture thinking. And there are a few of us that seem to gravitate towards big picture thinking, but I think we're very much a minority. But I think most people are very caught up in day-to-day life. And 100 or 200 years ago, our day-to-day lives were not that destructive to the planet.
Mhm.
I mean, they just weren't. We didn't have all the modern technology. We didn't have all the oil burning. We didn't have the gas. We didn't have all these things.
Yeah.
So it's like our destructiveness, the impact we're having on the planet has widened and widened and grown, and it's gotten worse and worse. But our consciousness has remained basically the same. I mean, very limited, very small
Yeah.
consciousness in terms of dealing with what we're actually creating. So we're creating this huge mess, but we're not thinking in ways that enable us to deal with it responsibly or rationally or deal with it at all. I mean, we're just
Yeah.
creating this big mess and that's it. We're just
Yeah.
doing it.
Yeah.
It's really mind-boggling.
Yeah.
But
You
our
know,
minds are not keeping up. I mean, clearly our minds are not keeping up with our so-called progress.
I I want to get a quote here from a book I've got right over here.
Okay.
All right. So one way I've started to answer this question for myself of how have we become such a self-terminating global presence when we have a far longer history behind us of living in smaller groups, being far less destructive, being far
Yeah.
less self-destructive or self-terminating. So there's some other dynamics that are at play. I guess the best way I could describe my introduction to it, and it wasn't really my introduction, but I found it uh, kind of bizarre. When I was writing my one and only book to date, The Impossible Conversation, Choosing Resilience and Reconnection at the End of Business as Usual. There's the
Hmm.
book plug.
Yeah, yeah, that's
Um,
good.
so I had never read a, excuse me, I had never written a book before. I had really no idea how to go about something so massive. As I was looking at sharing my own initial exploration of this impossible conversation. Like, oh my God, this is really happening. And I found myself in the middle of my research and writing of the book, uh, finding out about a guy named Edward Bernays. And by now, there's, quite a few YouTube videos that'll include about Edward Bernays and his creation of the foundation that became public relations, the foundation that
Oh, yeah, yeah,
became
yeah. Yeah.
the different elements that are so potent at a huge scale to manipulate large swaths, whole nations full of people
Yep. Yeah.
to become more compliant as citizens. So to follow the instructions of the government or
Hmm.
those who are in power, and
Yeah.
to set aside any notion that they have agency as the kind of lower echelon, that they really need to just acquiesce to whatever the people in power have to say. And that same logic and many of the same tools were, of course, used and are used today at a scale that's hard to fathom for us to become ideal consumers. We're consumers long before we're human beings. And in order to get us there, we had to be, we had to have a part of our agency removed. The part of us that we would know if we were a couple of thousand years ago, as you're just pointing to, where we had a simpler way of living, in which we were far more connected with one another. And there was a real agency called relationship, us with the land, us with each other. And I think this is far larger than I think we can include in any big way in this conversation, but perhaps in later ones. But I do want to mention that I'm going to read the very first paragraph from Edward Bernays' book, Propaganda.
Huh.
And yeah, he's not the person who coined that phrase, but he certainly brought it to prominence. And that book, this book, Propaganda, was actually on the desk of Goebbels, the information and
Yeah.
communication master of the Third Reich.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I'd like to just read this because I want to make very clear that in my understanding of this conversation that we're having, like what is the status of Wetiko in terms of global
Mm.
control of narrative, global
Yeah.
control of the masses by a smaller number of people. And Edward Bernays was instrumental in
Yeah.
massive ways of both the government control of narrative and having and controlling the populations to go along with whatever they wanted them to go along with. So it goes like this. The conscious and intelligent manipulation of the organized habits and opinions of the masses is an important element in democratic society. Those who manipulate this unseen mechanism of society constitute an invisible government, which is the true ruling power of our country.
Mm.
We are governed, our minds molded, our tastes formed, our ideas suggested, largely by men we have never heard of. This is the logical result of the way in which our democratic society is organized. Vast numbers of human beings must cooperate in this manner if they are to live together as a smoothly functioning society.
Mm.
So it is that control by that select small number of men who coordinate this rendition, this version of society, because those masses just don't really have that intelligence. They don't have the wherewithal to be in charge like those select few men. And that uh, really, I think, describes well who wrote Edward Bernays really big checks for his very long life. He did very, very well, thank you very much,
Mm.
by selling this product of how to control the masses
Right.
to serve the government and
Yeah.
how to control the masses to serve the needs and wants of the corporate reality that was indeed writing the checks. So, another element, another way in which this white man's virus has gone to an extraordinary scale and then fueled by the fossil fuel revolution of this past 100 years in particular.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. And unfortunately, with the spread of social media and the internet, it's had some wonderful effects. I mean, here we are on a Zoom call. We're able to see each other. We're able to communicate in real time. That's all due to this wonderful invention called the internet. But there's a lot of unfortunate horrors that are developing out of the internet too. Social media is mainly turning out to have very negative effects, in
Yeah,
my opinion. And it's, a place where this propaganda and Wetiko can spread and flourish and basically go unchallenged. People put out all kinds of crap on the internet and it spreads like wildfire. And you got, viral nonsense going all over the world. And before you know it, somebody said this, that a lie spreads 10 times faster than the truth or something like that.
yes,
I don't know why, but it does. Sometimes, somehow it does. And
yeah,
these lies are basically taking over our world. And I just gotta say, Batiko seems to be firmly entrenched and firmly in control
yeah,
of our world right now. And that, I think, is one of the main reasons why why hopium is nonsense. I mean, unless we were able to deal with that directly and effectively, we're in a downward spiral. I mean, our
yeah,
world is continuing this downward spiral, given all the factors that are going on right now, and all these things combining, we're in this massive downward spiral, and it's a rapid one too. So I do not see a good solution here. I mean, I do not see a good solution for the world on the big picture. Again, world, society, United States, the big picture. I don't see any good solutions. Now, there's some good solutions available for people, individuals, small groups, couples,
right.
whatever, friendships. I mean, those are all wonderful things, and we need to cultivate those things. But, the big picture is looking pretty grim.
Yeah. I'm at, you and I have had this conversation in the various circles that we both sit in here in Living Resilience. We cross this territory a lot in our
Yeah.
sharing, and I am in total agreement. And it's extraordinary to me how those initial questions that I had 50 years ago,
Yep.
they're still there.
Yep. Me
But
too.
now, given what you were just talking about, just bringing up, look at the power of the escalation of every negative feature
Yep.
of the Wetiko culture is expanded through the use of the internet. It is, it's hard to overstate. And then I guess it's just worth mentioning that the next item on that in exponential curve up in terms of negative impact is the inclusion of AI, of artificial intelligence,
Yeah.
and what it what it appears to be not just promising for some point in the future, but actually is very, very present right now. I'm including a small segment in every month's curriculum in this year-long program that we've got going on in Living Resilience called Islands of Sanity in a Mad World. And this monthly segment is meant to be just something that kind of goes above a threshold of, man, this is an important update. This isn't just more doom scrolling or more of the fire hose to the
Yeah.
face of too much content, which we're all subject to every day. But some piece of an update, some portion of this multi-crisis or poly-crisis that we're in. And the one that comes to mind, given what you were just saying, is um, there have been a series of very bold, very clear statements from both corporate voices and government voices in the past 2 years in particular,
Hmm.
and particularly in this past year because of the zero-sum extraordinary competition going on amongst the massive uh, uh, information technology companies that are all competing to get to that pinnacle of AI. Like there is a way, they say, to win this thing, and it is a winner take all competition. There is no
Yeah.
value for anybody to compare with. Whoever gets that top position, whoever finds advanced general intelligence, excuse me, artificial general intelligence, whoever gets that ring on the on
Yeah.
the merry-go-round that they're all fighting for so desperately is going to get it all. Is the ultimate level of control. So says the people that seem to know about these things.
Everybody wants to rule the world, right?
Yeah. So to loop it back to what you were just saying is that what's unfortunate on top of the obvious implications of this zero-sum ultimate competition is that there is no there is no engagement at scale anymore because of these articles that have been put out, these statements that have been put out by government and by corporate voices, that there is no intention whatsoever to reduce our consumption of fossil fuels or to reduce the CO2 and other gases that are causing the climate change part.
No, it's still expanding all over the world. Yeah.
And so, really, the promise is that we are now engaged with this zero-sum competition. And that means that we are, and I'm using this we as the corporate voices and the government voices, we are now engaged in this competition, and it takes more fuel, more fossil fuels, more consistent and more power generation and power use than
See,
we've
that's
ever
that
had.
that's that logic of insanity that we were talking about earlier. The
Exactly.
logic of insanity, man.
But what's
Oh
what
boy.
what's so apparent to me, and I know to you as well, and probably to most of the folks watching this, is that we, of course, don't hear that spoken like on the news of the what's left of the network news and that sort of thing. But even in the vast majority of alternative press and internet press of every stripe, it we are in um, an accelerated version of this self-termination. And I'm going to put a link in the show notes and in other places here in this particular video to take people to Daniel Schmachtenberger, one of the most extraordinary futurist voices,
Oh, I think I listened to the one you're
existential
talking about. Yeah.
existential risk voices on the planet today, where he spells it out. He spells it out like couldn't be clearer. And there's nobody more competent to offering that kind of statement to the world than Daniel Schmachtenberger.
Hmm.
And it's his view of what's actually moving and shaping right now, not some imaginary 5 years or 10 years from now. So,
Got a, I got a thought about that.
yeah, please.
Um, I've been thinking a lot about AI and this push, this intense push to create the ultimate, AI and for the national dominance and all this nonsense. But I think that it's like a really good example of the crazy internal logic of Wetiko, of the Wetiko mindset. I just want to say, talking about this is very hard because it's a really difficult subject to put into words. It's just really hard to express adequately. But we're sitting here trying, so I'm going to try.
Yeah.
Uh, but to me, it's like this completely delusional mindset. First of all, it's totally outer focused. I mean, we're going to create this machine, these devices that are going to have wondrous artificial intelligence that's going to somehow save us. And I think that's the background feeling. It's like, oh, we can't really save ourselves. We're not together enough, whatever. We're going to have these super intelligent machines and they're going to swoop in and save us. I think that's total bullshit. I mean, to me, it's utter nonsense. And it also diverts us from our true nature and from our true mission, which is to grow and become wiser ourselves. How about our own intelligence? How about augmenting our own wisdom and intelligence? I mean, what the hell? Why are we focusing all of that desire or need on machines?
Right.
We're the ones who need to grow. We need to expand our minds. Why won't we do that? That's to me, that's almost the essence of Wetiko right there. This diversion to this external focus, putting all our energy into that, and it's not only pointless, it's destructive. It's like horrendous. It's not who we are. It's not what we need to be doing. Yet
Yeah.
that's what we're doing.
Yeah.
It's so crazy. That's Wetiko right there,
It is absolutely. And
to me.
yeah, the word that keeps coming up for me in the process of, I've been 10 years at offering the here's the elevator pitch for the living resilience body of work is that we're offering transformative support, resources, and practices to people who are bravely facing human-caused collapse of both Earth and human systems. And both of us in our own ways here in these past few minutes have been pointing to, yeah, and it's accelerating and it's intensifying.
Yeah.
And we have these creations, or elements that are in their own cynical way. I want to call them beautiful or creative or imaginative, but at this point, all I can see is the cynical side of how much uh, fossil fuel use, and now fossil fuel use past a threshold where we're willfully ignorant at this point.
Yeah.
That of course is part of that self-terminating nature. And then add AI to it, and you've got all the perverse incentives that were articulated by an earlier Daniel Schmachtenberger when his main focus was to teach us about these perverse incentives in the marketplace, in government, in the control of the narrative, and so on.
Mm.
And those have been the way that we've been pulled into this being consumers before we're anything else. And what that seems to imply to me is that we have forfeited our soul individually and collectively. And I think that's what I was just hearing you say in slightly different words,
Yeah.
is we've had our soul sucked out. And all that's left is this hollow kind of going through the motions in service of what sometimes is called Moloch. And I'll put a couple of links in the show notes about some extraordinary ways of expressing kind of the mechanics
Yeah.
of this whole machine that our culture, a global culture, has become. So for me, I would just ask that we both pause for a moment because I think we both seem to be expressing a pining. I'll speak for myself, and I'm hoping you'll give me your perspective and your experience. Is there's a part of me that needs to slow down even in this conversation to touch even a small amount of what it feels like to have that hole where a soul wants to be, where a soul would like to be living and inspiring a life. And for me, I have been at this understanding, at this trying to heal or integrate or come to terms with this Wetiko presence that I've been saturated in since birth, just like everybody else.
Yeah.
And so the best that I can say that I'm experiencing in myself at this after decades of working on this, of this integration and this healing and this coming to terms with and how to reclaim soul, how to reconnect with the juicy, very human, flawed, creative, loving, orgasmic,
Yeah, yeah.
all the love and the hate and the humanness and the stinky farts and the the realness of human beings being together in that raw and very authentic core way that seems to be the way to invite back in something that we might call soul.
Right. Yeah, yeah, that's beautiful. Uh, what that kind of sparks off in me is I don't know if this is just me. I mean, I had a fairly, sheltered middle class background. My parents were teachers, actually, both of them. I mean, my dad was a political science professor and my mother was an English teacher. And I grew up with some teachers and, there's a lot of emphasis on education. So I got a good education. I mean, I'm thankful for that. That was great. Um, So I'm not sure if this is only true for me because I'm, a pretty educated person. I grew up in a household that valued education, but it seems to me that uh, most people, it's very hard for people to get outside of Wetiko at all. They don't have the frame of reference to do it, you
Mhm.
know? And yet, I mean, I feel like I was fortunate because I got educated about some things like ancient Greek philosophy and various other ways of looking at life. And I also traveled around the world after college and I got to see other cultures. I spent time in several other cultures. So I know that Western culture is not the answer to all human questions. It's not the ultimate pinnacle of human society at all. Um, but I don't know, also somehow within myself, I have a sense, or maybe I relearned, I guess I kind of relearned that there is this essential me somehow it's still in me. I mean, there's this essential being, soul,
Mhm.
spirit, I don't know what to call it,
Sure.
that this being was very covered over and obscured by all kinds of crap. Some of it was from my family, some of it from the society, some of it from idiotic concepts that were taught in our society, the consumerism, all those things. I was kind of buried under many, many layers of all that crap, but somehow a part of me knew there was some genuine me in there somewhere, and I've been working real hard for many decades to, I don't know, unearth that real self of my true soul
Mhm.
and do a lot of work on digging through all these layers of crap and getting rid of them to some degree. So my point is, I think it's possible to do that, but you have to have some kind of willingness to really explore deeply in yourself. You got to be willing to go through those layers of crap and all the shit and the pain and get in touch with your own suffering and all the restrictions that you've been putting on yourself or that society's been putting on us and
Mhm.
get in touch with all that and be willing to experience it. But unfortunately, a lot of people aren't willing to do that.
Yeah.
I mean, that's really a problem. I mean, we could maybe vanquish Watiko if enough of us really wanted to do that deep dive into ourselves. And I don't see any way to conquer Wetiko without that, but it seems like most people just aren't willing to do that. They're not willing to go there.
Yeah.
They'd rather be comfortable in the short term, or they'd rather just stay with their comfortable little concepts of things.
Yeah.
And that does not work. I mean, that's keeping us stuck on this downward spiral, I mean,
Yes.
shit. It's very frustrating. I mean, I'm a therapist. I've spent a lot of time working with people and counseling people, and the extent of human denial and fear of self-exploration is really intense. I mean, I'd say that's one of our major problems. I mean, until we can really delve into ourselves and find that soul within us and heal that place or reunite with that place, how can we possibly heal enough to get rid of Wetiko,
Right.
And that's a very frustrating thing for me.
Yeah. I'm sure with you. Uh, you're reminding me that um, ever since I put together my first online coursework and live, I I remember back when we actually did live courses with people sitting in the same room before COVID
Yeah,
and so on.
I
Uh,
know. Yeah,
but what you're describing, hmm, I'm just taking a moment to make sure that I want to connect with what you were just talking about with this other thread. There's a guy from Canada who's uh, by his own admission, he's a practicing Buddhist, not particularly high up in the ranks, if you will, of Buddhism, but he's also a blogger, a writer, and his name is Paul Chafurka. And
yeah,
he one of the things that he put out quite a while ago, just a brief little essay that suggested a way we might position ourselves on a spectrum of how do I engage with life so that I can take on in any way, at any scale, how to integrate the very things you were just talking about, Richard.
yeah,
Like how do I come to terms with what we're actually doing to ourselves and then what's my part in this and how can I possibly reclaim some of this soul, some of this essence, human, very real and raw human essence, as opposed to the kind of hollowness that's left when we engage with the Wetiko.
yeah,
And something that he said is just this again, just this simple few pages long. I'll include a link to the Paul Trafurka stages of awareness model. And it's just, I think it's maybe four stages that he suggests. And he knows that it's very simplified and it's
yeah,
oversimplified, but gosh darn it, it seems to be helpful
yeah,
in the name of the conversation that you're talking about. And he starts us out with business as usual, which he also calls dead asleep. And the vast majority of us, well, all of us are
yeah,
born into that. And it will be only a very, very small number of people who will go even to the first stage of awareness beyond business as usual. So you go from, let's say, 8 billion down to maybe a billion.
yeah,
It's a big jump down. It means that the vast majority of people alive today will not have this kind of conversation, will
yeah,
not explore this at all.
right,
And that's just to get to the first level. Then the second level, third level, fourth level, each imply a jump in willingness to take on those tough conversations you were just talking about. This
right.
is work. This is
Yep,
no kidding, some of the toughest inner work
yep,
of collapse
yes.
of any inner work that's ever been suggested at any level of humanity. This is the real deal. So there's a number of very good reasons why so few people will want to engage with it, because why would I want to engage with it when I've got this little device in my hand that I can distract myself endlessly till the day I die? I don't have to think about these heavy things. And he also offers to us the notion that there's a way to engage with this expansion of awareness that gives us
Mhm.
more and more of an opportunity to possibly reclaim that soul, reclaim that human essence.
Right.
And there are ways that could be called internal, have an internal orientation or an external orientation. And
Yeah.
both of those, he asserts, have a distinct possibility of helping us move to the next level. So my orientation might be internal, yours might be external, meaning I'm engaging with the internal aspects, like this whole Wetiko thing,
Hmm.
which is overlaps some with, but is in many ways distinct from what's Carl Jung offered us called the human shadow.
Yeah.
So
No, it's
internal,
connected at least. Yeah, it's connected for
these
sure.
these are internal ways of doing this work, and we're just going to barely mention them here. There's external ways which I have seen in my own experience and in so many others, that there's is extraordinary opening and reclaiming of soul if we turn our attention toward perhaps being of service to others, being more deeply related and directly connected
Yeah.
with the people we love or people in our community or even people we don't love so much, we don't get along with so much, people who are different than we are. So external types of work that can possibly nudge us up that continuum of stages of awareness toward more reclaiming of soul. Um,
Yeah, I think, one thing you brought up, which is pretty crucial, is that with each advance, I don't know what to call it, moving from one level to another, the amount of people who make that movement or make that transition keeps getting smaller and smaller.
exactly,
And
exactly.
you get to that final level or highest level of awareness where you're, aware of the whole global situation and the, the massive ramifications of all different parts interacting with each other. And you have much more of that kind of holistic ecological awareness. That might not even be the highest level, but even at that level, not that many people get there or even willing to go there. So that in itself is like that's due to the influence of Wetiko partially. I mean, it might be partially genetics, who knows? I mean,
Yeah.
people have lots of different capacity, levels of capacity to understand things, but that, the very small minority of people who are really waking up to what's going on is this one of the scariest aspects of what's happening to me, because that tells me that the path we're on is going to keep going the way it's going.
Yeah.
Not enough people want to change it. Not enough people even want it to be different.
Right.
Or if they want it to be different, they don't have any sense of how it could be different or anything like that. So they just give up and say, oh, this is just the way it is, and go about their business. Business as usual.
Yeah.
And, unless we had a much bigger number of people who are willing to change things and change themselves, yeah, we're just going to keep doing what we're doing. You
Mhm.
know, I don't see any way out of it, frankly. I mean,
Yeah.
this collapse awareness has to become collapse acceptance. It's like this whole system is in the process of collapsing.
Yeah. Yeah. It seems like you and I are both nudging us toward, God, this is such a massive topic, and we
Sure is.
literally could do this,
No,
weekly for the rest, all the way through 2025,
for
and probably
sure.
not sound its depths.
I
But
know.
we both are nudging toward what feels like a more
Sorry.
palpable, within reach um, some suggestions, some sharing that we might do, like, hey, this has been something that's been useful for me in my process of reclaiming my own sense of soul or deep connection. And we're both seemingly kind of forming, if it was clay, we would be working the
Yeah,
clay to
yeah,
describe
right.
the scale at which it's real for us. You know, you've been describing, you've been throwing around the words of like the small group level, the family level, the neighborhood level, and I'm absolutely with you. I don't know how else, at what other scale is possible. It's literally just not how my mind works. I don't have a clue. I'm not that guy who's going to think of those larger scale breakthroughs that might
Mhm.
happen for society or at least large chunks of people. I don't have a clue. So I find myself when I follow the threads that both you and I have been sharing in this time together, the only place I can look is first in my own experience and look at how can I desaturate myself to even a small degree from this Wetiko based culture and its self-terminating nature. How can I desaturate myself and create a little bit of space where I could call in that more earth-based and soul-based way of being, way of relating.
Yeah, I think this is where communion, I mean, really deep communion, communication, and relationship with like-minded souls who
Yeah.
have a similar understanding and have, a similar vision. That's really crucial because, when we're surrounded by Watiko and all the unconsciousness and all the diversions and all the
Mhm.
bullshit that's constantly being flung around by everybody, mainly in an effort to not deal with what's going on and not really have to confront it.
Mhm.
I mean, if we're surrounded by that all the time, we have to have ways to connect with other people who are genuine and really connecting with that genuine soul place in themselves, because otherwise we're just lost and we're drowning. It's like otherwise we're like drowning in the sea of crap. And somehow we have to make those connections. I mean, whether it's through the internet or in person or all the above.
Yeah.
But we got to have it. Is my point.
Yeah.
That's one thing.
Yeah. Right. Um, there's another paragraph from Paul Levy's 2014 article that I started us out today reading from, and I read it. I'd like to share it as a sharing of something that I have encountered. You know, I've been at this reclaiming of soul, which is the way I would sum up my engagement with this conversation for decades.
Hmm. Yeah.
And I bring it up not to be a curmudgeon, not to be just a negative, kind of doom scrolling, oh, this is never going to happen, people will never heal, and so on. I don't at all mean this. But I think there's a blind spot, even in the most sincere groups of people wanting to do what you're describing, Richard, come together in some sincere way, some small scale way to be present for one another, to hold space for one another as we desaturate. It's kind of a painful process of desaturating and coming to terms with the impossibility that our culture is built on. And so what I'm wanting to mention in this particular thing I'd like to read in just a moment is there are shadow elements in us individually and collectively that is part of that saturation. It's not just a benign thing that has us want to do these addictive behaviors, these distracting behaviors, and it's
Oh
all
no.
benign and okay, let's party like it's 1999 or whatever.
Oh no, not at all. No.
um, there are elements that are shadowy that do exist with all those dynamics that Carl Jung Carl Jung spelled out for us so long ago. And there are ways in which culturally it starts to get it starts to get oddly adversarial in an extraordinary way. I don't know how else to describe it.
Hmm. Oh, okay. You were frozen there for like 10 seconds. Okay.
Okay. Do you remember the last thing that I said that was intelligible?
Uh, well, you were talking about the shadow and
Hmm.
Jung's talk about the shadow and
Okay.
how that impacts us and stuff like that.
Yeah. So I guess I'm hoping that people, as they're listening to this conversation, I hope that they're starting to formulate their own version of what you've been describing so well, Richard, that, you know, what's the scale at which you and your loved ones or your neighbors might come together and start to find a healthy way, a healthier way to interact with one another, to support one another in these times. And what I'm trying to point out here in that kind of formulation is just keep an eye out for shadow behavior. Like oddly, there are ways that once I get to a certain limit of my capacity to just be with this self-terminating system, I can start to turn it around and want to project it out onto other people
Hmm.
so that I don't have to feel what I'm feeling. Is that, I don't know if that communicates well, but it seems to be a shadow dynamic that is pretty common.
Well, yeah, I mean, it can take the form of scapegoating,
Yeah,
finding other groups or people to blame and
yeah,
make them evil, and all that stuff. Yeah, sure.
yeah. So I just want to throw out this one paragraph as something to consider, something to just keep in your pocket as a shadow element to keep your eyes open for, and to be very, very gentle with ourselves and with each other in
Right.
any group that's formulating, to just realize this, there are shadow elements in this Wetiko world that can be quite destructive, they can be unbelievably cruel without even realizing that it is. And I think that's, for instance, part of the global conversation around the stuff going on with Israel and Gaza.
Hmm. Yeah.
The genocide, literally a genocide.
Yeah.
And that's a deeply shadow element on the national scale and now the global scale. And so we have these huge shadow elements that can, without, I'll speak for myself, that I can be very cruel without even knowing. I can have a knee-jerk reaction to someone who has a different point of view about this genocide that's going on. And I can say things before I know what's going on. I can say things to them. I can have a judgment about them. I can project onto them in a really quite a cruel way. So I guess I just want to offer a little snapshot of one kind of shadow that can show up if we have this kind of intention to come together in a good way. So, if I may, I'll just offer this up. People taken over by Wetiko are suffering from an autoimmune disease of the psyche. In autoimmune deficiencies, in autoimmune deficiency syndrome. The immune system of the organism perversely attacks the very life it's trying to protect.
Hmm.
In trying to live, it destroys life, ultimately destroying even itself. In the same way, once Wetiko has insinuated itself into a living entity, it acts like a perverted antibody, treating the wholesome parts of the system as cancerous tumors to be exterminated.
Thanks. Yeah. Hmm. Hmm. That's a good one.
So I'm I'm really not intending to put some deep and dark, massive boulder into the center of the conversation. It can look like that to me when I have encountered this kind of dynamic in any group that is trying to do a good thing, trying to desaturate themselves in some small way and create a pocket of sanity or a pocket of goodness in the face of, if it's genocide or if it's climate and environment or whatever the issue is that the group may be taken on.
Hmm.
Um, I just want to offer what I think is a brilliant summary of some of the shadow elements that can show up and likely will show up. So, yeah.
Yeah. Well, what that makes me think of is one of the, I think one of the main ways that Wetiko operates is through the power of illusion.
Mm, mm, mm.
And, of course, in our culture with media and multimedia and social media and all these different ways of communicating, the illusion is everywhere. I mean, we're being inundated with illusions, and some of them are purposeful illusions, and a lot of them are just illusions that people believe in their lives, but we're inundated with illusions. And so I'd say that disillusionment in a positive sense is a real crucial
Mhm.
aspect of kind of getting beyond Wetiko, or at least seeing through it enough to access our true selves. Because we got to disillusion ourselves from this massive amount of illusion that we're living in. It's a weird way to think of it, but I think in that way, disillusionment's a really positive force. And especially because Wetiko operates mainly through deception, including self-deception. I
Yes,
mean, Wetiko is very involved with manipulation, exploitation, deception,
yes,
all those things, and that includes, manipulating and deceiving ourselves even.
yeah,
Wow.
yeah,
And we got to disillusion ourselves from all of that crap, which
yeah,
is really quite a tall order, as you know.
yeah,
Very difficult, but worthwhile.
yeah. Gosh darn it, I think you and I have done a pretty decent job of just dipping our toes in the water or in some small way in introducing folks to one of the most extraordinary conversations humanity's ever generated,
Yeah,
on top of this self-terminating culture that we are in. So this Wetiko view or framing
yeah,
of this self-terminating culture that in which we live, I appreciate what each of us has brought from our own experience and our own explorations of this stuff. And I guess I would also say welcome for especially to folks for whom this is a new conversation and it can be daunting. And to the best of our ability, we're creating circles and spaces in this living resilience body of work to invite these conversations, these formulating conversations, especially for folks who are new at it, who are just trying to find their bearings, trying to find a place to stand that makes any sense whatsoever,
Right.
and a place that I can't promise that these spaces are going to be free of the shadow that you and I have just been talking about for the past hour. In fact, at best, what we can do is just be committed together to holding space for one another when those shadows show up, to be able to name it and to the best of our ability to be gentle with ourselves and with each other in considering what are the effects of the shadows that are showing up, and how do we include them? How do we integrate them? How do we dissipate them in a good way? As Paul Levy goes on to speak about in his full-on books about Wetiko, these I don't know how else to do it. This is the most difficult shadow event in human history. It's the most challenging conversation in human history, no matter how you slice it.
Hmm.
And no wonder, as you've said a number of times now, no wonder fewer and fewer people are engaged with these stages of awareness as you
Yeah.
go up, because it takes work.
Does.
This is deep and extraordinarily challenging work. And so
Hmm.
I would invite folks for whom you're getting a taste of this conversation and these possibilities of framing it, and to come join us. Come join us in whatever level of the conversation you're up for.
I have a process comment in a way.
Yeah,
Uh, I mean, relationship is about communication and, the process that happens between people, right? So you and I have been engaged in a process here, and we're communicating and we're sharing our thoughts and all that. And for me, I can feel, okay, in my body, I feel that. I can feel it, I mean, it's like this wonderful feeling of communion and sharing, and it's like a heart-opening kind of thing, heart-opening experience. And that in itself, that's a clue. I mean, that's part of defeating with ego right there. I mean, we're
beautiful.
tapping into this completely other energy, which is genuine and truthful and real and soulful, and it's there, and we're tapping into it. So that's a wonderful thing. And I think this is like a process, an example
Yes.
of the kind of work that you can do to overcome with ego, at least to some degree.
Beautiful. Beautifully said. You're reminding me of a word we use a lot in these support circles that we're talking about,
Hmm.
and that is coherence.
Right.
When we come together in a circle with one another, it's an opportunity to generate an alignment with one another. We do not have identical points of view or
Right.
experiences. We have, lots of different elements going on for each of us, but somehow there is this unanimous experience almost immediately now in our circles of generating this coherence,
Yeah.
this space in which each of us can authentically express ourselves and have a presence that authentically expresses who we are in this moment, and this moment, and this moment. And that is an extraordinary uh, contrast, Richard. If I'm just trying to put these words coherence and incoherence into the framing that you just shared about the process piece of what we
Yeah.
do,
Yeah, definitely.
because there is no more incoherent expression on the planet than that which we are creating that will take us down,
Yeah.
that is self-terminating. There's no more incoherent expression that I can think of.
Yeah, right.
And here we are as a human expression on the planet, and our primary expression is to be self-terminating. Talk about incoherence. Oh my God.
Yeah, I know, I know. It's
And so
really,
what you're
it's
pointing to
unbelievable. It
here,
really is. It's
yeah,
totally amazing.
yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm I'm thinking that the envelope is coming close to closing for us in
Right.
this particular round of the conversation. And I'm wondering if you've got such an extraordinary life history and elements that you've put together in the course of your life. You know, having been a therapist for quite a long time, and then to do the writing that you do, that's exactly about this neighborhood. You write about this neighborhood,
Oh,
and
yeah.
yeah. So I'm curious if there's any way that you would like to kind of sum up the portion of this conversation that is most alive for you, that you could sum up in some way as if you were speaking to some of the folks who are new to this conversation. Is there any way that you'd like to um, give them a landing place that could add to that coherence? Is there anything that you could offer?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I'll just say, we're all dealing with this Wetiko madness that is basically spread around the world and in some ways is taking over the planet and destroying the planet simultaneously. And we're all in it. We're all having to deal with it on one level or another. Even if you're trying to escape it, you're still running from it. So we're all dealing with it. Um, but I think getting to know what Wetiko is, how it operates, and have a sense of that counterfeit destructive reality that Wetiko is constantly creating and spinning out, having that sense and getting that inner knowing is really important these days because otherwise you're just swept up in the tsunami of bullshit and tsunami of destructive crap,
Mhm.
like that fire hose to the face of nonstop crap that we get coming at us. So that's one thing that's really important. But then the other thing I think is equally important is to find that way of filling yourself or tapping into that wholeness or the soul within us, because that's the part that gets obscured and trampled basically by Wetiko. And we need to resurrect it and love that part of ourselves. I mean, we need to resurrect and heal our own souls. That's part of this process. I mean, without that, we're left with nothing, really.
Mhm.
I mean, Wetiko is taking everything from us. We have to start taking ourselves back. That's and I don't want to just this isn't a plug for therapy, but I do want to put in a plug, I guess, for self exploration. I'll call it self exploration,
Yeah.
diving deep into ourselves and our own pain and suffering, and being willing to go there because when you go through it, you can come out the other side feeling a lot better. You can come out feeling a lot wholer, more, I don't know, more aware, more centered, more loving. All those things, we can access those things in ourselves, but we got to be willing to go inside and do the work. So I guess it's a plug for inner work, I suppose.
Right.
Uh, it's worth it. And it's a group that's I think that's the only real antidote to Atiko, actually.
Hmm.
Because you can't get there without the self-awareness, without the self-exploration. And you have
Yeah.
to go there. If you want to feel better and find a way past Wetiko, you got to be willing to go inside and explore yourself and really delve deep into who we are.
Yeah. Really beautifully said. You know, that's one of the ways we describe this work is that this is the inner work of collapse.
I know, and it is.
And it is work, and it is serious. And it also I got to also bring a balance that one of the most refreshing, rejuvenating aspects of this entire body of work is how often, in the simplest of ways, in those circles that we sit in together, that it's actually more likely that we will find a pocket of joy, of deep joy and connectedness, of
Mhm.
authentic tears of joy. I've
Oh
found
yeah,
myself time and time
definitely.
again. And it's always available right next to that which is the hard work, that which is the painful truth that we have to digest in some way. Right next to it is that possibility, that reality of the joy of interbeing.
Yep. And sometimes they the pain can kind of transmute somehow into the joy. I'm not sure exactly how that works, but I've noticed it does work.
Yeah, yeah.
It's amazing, yeah.
Richard, thank you so much for taking this time to have this conversation with me. And I predict we're going to be revisiting some of these elements in some future conversations. And I look forward to staying connected with your writing on Medium and the Good Men Project and a number of other locations. We'll put some links to your work in the show notes as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's been great.